Hi students, in today's class we will study about the post-Mauryan age. Students generally feel easy when they are reading about Mauryan Empire and also Gupta Empire, whereas the time period between Mauryas and Guptas is complicated age for many students. In this class we will try to make you understand different aspects, and after listening to this class you feel comfortable in studying post-Mauryan age as well. Here we have to study about different geographic important locations, different dynasties, important personalities, and socio-economic political systems under various dynasties. And we see their contribution to the art and culture as well. First, we will use world map and India map wherever it is required. First, we will see this is how the empires of India is transforming. Nanda Empire, during the time period of Nanda dynasty, this was the kind of geographic area they commanded. After Nandas, Mauryas made a pan-Indian empire. Now you can see the kind of the geographic they commanded. The Mauryan Empire, especially under Ashoka. After Ashoka, his successors were very weak. They could not handle this much large empire. The last ruler named Brihadratha. He was very weak ruler. He could not handle the state of affairs. He was killed by his own Senapati or commander-in-chief Pushyamitra Shunga. Then he established a new dynasty, that is Shunga dynasty. This happened around 187 BC or 185 BC. Different traditions are giving different time period. 187 or 185 BC is the beginning time period of Shunga dynasty. However, Shungas could not rule entire Indian subcontinent like the Mauryas. Around the same time period, in different parts of the country, different dynasties also came up. While studying about Mauryan period, we have seen that in the northwestern part of India, Alexander invaded the northwestern part of India. However, he could not consolidate, he could not rule because of his early death. His commanders divided his empire into different parts. Egypt under one commander, this Asia part came under a Seleucid and under Seleucid Empire. So Seleucid Empire was commanding all these areas till northwestern part of India. This we have seen. Even Ashoka also mentioned about different Western Asian empire names. After the death of Ashoka, the people here became very powerful. As long as Ashoka was there, he maintained very strongly, whereas the weak rulers of Mauryas could not handle northwestern part of India well. Continuous invasions were taking place further deep into the Indian subcontinent. This is one of the reasons for the revolt within the army itself and killing of Brihadratha by his own commander-in-chief Pushyamitra Shunga. When Pushyamitra Shunga was ruling the eastern part of India under the Pataliputra was the capital. Another important capital for Shunga was Vidisha. Vidisha or Sanchi also important area for Shungas. One tradition says probably Pushyamitra Shunga came from Ujjaini region, Ujjaini and Vidisha region. When Pataliputra was under Shungas, the northwestern part of India were under Indo-Greeks. By this time period, Greek culture, Indo-Greeks settled here. They have taken this part as their home. These people we are calling them as Indo-Greeks. After Indo-Greeks, once again it was the age of continuous movement. Now in the central part, as in India there is no strong central administration who can control the invasions in the northwestern part of India. It was always a region of continuous movement in our entire history. Now for the first time we have seen This is the post-Mauryan period. Later, after Guptas or at the end of Gupta age also, we will see this kind of movement. Once again, in the form of Turks in early medieval and medieval period, we see this kind of invasions in the northwestern part of India. Here, Indo-Greeks were ruling. Now you see some tribes in Central Asia. Scythian, these people were called Scythians. They pushed Indo-Greeks further. These Scythians, they were attacking even China as well. They were attacking China also, they were attacking Indo-Greeks also. Around this time period, Chinese emperor created Great Wall of China. Chinese wall was constructed and the Scythians were pushed back. Now they don't have any choice but to push the Indo-Greeks further. Now Indo-Greeks further entered into Indian subcontinent. These people pushed Indo-Greeks. Now these people pushed further into Indian subcontinent. After Indo-Greeks, we see Indo-Scythian kingdoms. This is why Indo-Scythian kingdoms emerged after Indo-Greeks. Now Indo-Greeks were displaced, Indo-Scythians came. Here also, Shunga Empire was replaced by new dynasty, that is Kanwa dynasty. Now you can see the gradual changes. Within very short span of time, these things are happening. Indo-Greeks, then Scythians. Now you see there is one more neighbor, Parthian kingdom. These people based in Iran, these people based in Central Asia. Central Asians came, and for some time Parthians also pushed these people, and for some time Parthian kingdom also had some kind of territory under them. Scythians entered, Parthians, then Indo-Greeks. From Parthian kingdom only the term Pahalvas or Pallavas emerged. According to one inference, Parthians later, when they entered into India, they became Pahalvas. Finally, they became imperial powers in South India, Pallavas. Indo-Scythians. Around the same time period, in Deccan, there was a very strong empire, that is Satavahana Empire. And also in the eastern part, there is another empire, that is Kharavela Empire or Kalinga Empire. Now you see Shatavahanas, Kalingas. These two dynasties commanded very large area for some time period. During this time period, you can see Shakas, the Indo-Scythians. Here they were called, in Central Asia, they were called Scythians. When they entered into India, they became Indo-Scythians. And the term Indo-Scythian once again transformed into Shakas. Shakas were here. Pahalvas, you can see how the Parthian Empire, this was the Parthian Empire. Now they also became part of one of the political contenders of northwestern part of India. Now Indo-Greeks were displaced completely. Now Shakas, Shatavahanas, Kalingas. In the deep south, Sangam age kingdoms were there. Chola, Chera, Pandyas. Even Ashoka the Great also mentioned in one of his inscriptions about the existence of these small tribal kingdoms. They emerged strong powers after Mauryas. Now you can see at a time, within 100 or 200 years, the continuous change in the political setup of India. There is no centralized administration, there is no strong central power, there is no single ruler who can control the developments in the northwestern part of India. Whenever the territory is weak, whenever the frontiers are not protected properly, continuous invasions take place. Because this area is always, this is a junction area. It connects West Asia, Central Asia and Southeast Asia or South Asia. This is a junction where continuous movement is nature of the order of the nature. Even today also this area under Afghanistan, continuous struggle is going on in Afghanistan region. Throughout history this area is very essential to control by these powers. On one side Indian power, on the other hand Iranian power, and from the top Central Asian powers. They tried to meet here. When three great empires meet in one place, struggle is very common. When it comes to Indian subcontinent, these northwestern frontiers should be very strong. Mauryas faced this problem. Now just we began this story. This is going to be repeated further throughout our history. Even today also our India's foreign policy gives very special attention to the northwestern policy. For the first time we see in our history that there is a continuous military expansionism. According to one theory, Indo-Europeans are Aryans. Advent of Aryans, when we are studying about Aryan time period, Vedic age and later Vedic age, in the early Vedic period, Aryans also entered into the Indian subcontinent from this region only. However, we do not have proper sufficient evidence what happened to those people who already existed. What kind of violence was there, or whether it was a peaceful migration, we do not have sufficient evidence. When it comes to post-Mauryan age, we have a lot of evidence in the form of Greek writers, in the form of Roman writers, in the form of inscriptions and various literary books. This area is a very fluid, this time period is very fluid. Continuous battles and wars took place because already some political powers are existing here. When Aryans entered into the subcontinent, they were called Harappan people or Indus Valley people. We do not have any sufficient evidence that these Harappans fought against Aryans, because by the time Aryans entered around 1500 BC, already in 1750 BC itself, the Harappan civilization declined completely, gradually. The urban phase of Harappan civilization ended. Only rural structures of Harappan civilization were there. For the first time we see the migration. If it is a peaceful, we call it as migrations. If it is a violent one, then we call it as invasion. In post-Mauryan, that is why this age is also called the age of invasions. We have a lot of references of this violent conflict. One part is clear. The Central Asian and the Iranian affairs are going to affect the northwestern part of India. If central administration is weak, this impact is going to be felt on Indian subcontinent as well. The example is post-Mauryan age. The developments during post-Mauryan age is giving the evidence of this. Shakas. Now Shatavahanas and Kalingas, two powerful indigenous dynasties. After some time period, another tribe from Central Asia came. They became Kushans in case of Indian subcontinent. They were another tribe. They do not belong to the Scythian tribe. Scythia is different. After Scythians, Kushans, another tribe from Central Asia, they also came and they became very powerful emperors of the time period. They commanded very large area. They commanded till the influence of Kushanas is felt till Pataliputra, Malwa region, and in the Central Asia as well. Northwestern part, some parts of West Asia and some part of Central Asia. Now this is for the first time that a power is commanding both Indian subcontinent territory as well as Central Asian territory. Kushana, a powerful ruler of Kushana Empire, Kanishka. We know about Kanishka. So this is how you see how one after the other different dynasties and different tribes are entering and emerging as one of the political powers in the Indian subcontinent. When this kind of developments were going on, Satavahana Empire was very powerful in the Deccan part. For some time they fought with, now you see, Shatavahanas. When Shungas were there, Shatavahanas were there. When Kanvas were there, Shatavahanas were there. When Kalinga was there, Shatavahanas were there. Now when Satraps, these Shaka people, when Shakas came, once again Satavahanas came. This Satavahanas nearly for 500 years they ruled the Deccan part. During this time period they fought. Now you have seen the neighbors of Shatavahanas continuously changing. Initially they fought with the Shungas, they fought with Kanvas, they fought with Kalingas, they fought with the Shakas. So continuously, whenever a new political power emerges in the neighborhood, then struggle is a common phenomenon. Here Pandyan kingdom, Chola, Chera, Pandyas were there. Pandyan kingdom became one of the powerful empires in the deep south. All these things we are considering as part of post-Mauryan age. This geography aspect should be very important. Once you are clear with the geography, what is happening in which part of the country, then understanding and connecting other aspects become very easy. So first part, geography wise, we have seen how the geographical connectivity of Indian subcontinent with the Central Asia and West Asia is creating disturbances whenever there was continuous invasion. If any central administration is strong and if they control the border areas, then most of the problem is solved. The entire Indian subcontinent can come under centralized administration. Now we will see one by one what is the contribution of different dynasties. This is the reason some of the British historians termed this age as Dark Age. Here we are talking about from 2nd century BC to 3rd century AD. These 500 years, some of the European historians termed this age as Dark Age because there is no central authority. There is no central authority, continuous invasions. Indian powers did not unite to give stiff resistance to the invasions. Now remember, British historians means they are also invaders. In order to justify their empire, in order to justify their presence in India, they wanted to show the Indian history in this light. They wanted to show Indians that Indians always lived under someone who came from outside. When there was no centralized administration, they used to call the period as Dark Age. Once again, they have called from 2nd century BC to 3rd century AD also Dark Age they called, and also early medieval period. Early medieval period after the exit of Harshavardhana, after from 650 Harshavardhana around 647 he died. From 750 AD to 1200 AD, this is called early medieval period. This period was also called as Dark Age once again. However, if we study in detail, then these two periods are not at all Dark Ages. They are giving the evidence of one of the brightest developments that are happening in the Indian subcontinent during this time period. We will see how this age is not a dark age and some of the brightest developments, what are those developments. When it comes to early medieval period also, we will study why it was called dark age and why not it is dark age, and it is one of the glorious phases of Indian history. When it comes to this one, we see so many temple constructions, culture. Same thing Here also, culture wise, a strong development was going on. Centralized administration was not there. However, the individual independent regional kingdoms, they promoted culture and they became the pioneers of the Indian cultures in this post-Mauryan age. Now we will see the contribution of these developments, contribution of these dynasties one by one. First we start with Shungas. Remember, Shungas means your brain should go to the eastern part of India, that is Pataliputra. Shungas means at the maximum extent they ruled this much territory. Now we are talking about Shungas, and also remember the neighbors also. Shatavahanas were there, and in the northwestern part of India, Indo-Greeks. Indo-Greek, the moment you study about Shungas, the moment you try to remember Shungas, remember their territory, remember their neighbors. Shungas, geography wise, their capital, one is Pataliputra. Before Shungas, Pataliputra was the imperial capital of Mauryas. Another city which is important for Shungas was Vidisha. Vidisha, there are two important towns nearby. One is Sanchi. Sanchi is very popular. Sanchi Stupa is there. Another area called Besnagar. This is also located near Vidisha. These two places are culturally important. We will see how. We will take a fresh map. This is Pataliputra. Shungas are ruling from here. Here Indo-Greeks. Here Shungas. This is Vidisha, nearby Ujjain, Vidisha, Besnagar and Sanchi. What are the important aspects we have to remember for prelims examination? When it comes to mains examination, we have to understand all these aspects so far what we have discussed. Do you think post-Mauryan period is a dark age? That can be the mains question. Then you have to support your argument that it is not a dark age. Why it is not dark age? Now you have to support your argument with so many facts. These facts are both important for both preliminary examination and also when it comes to the mains examination, your enrichment of your mains answer writing. Always Shungas means Pataliputra, here Indo-Greeks, here Shatavahanas. Shatavahanas also fought for this region because these people were conflicting here. Whenever neighboring areas touches, then the neighbor is going to attack. The neighboring areas are always in trouble mode. Similarly, here also in the northwestern part of India. Conflict between Indo-Greeks and Shungas, conflict between Shungas and Shatavahanas. What is important here for us with respect to prelims examination? Important rulers. First one, Pushyamitra Shunga. Second one, Agnimitra. Agnimitra was son of Pushyamitra Shunga, Agnimitra. Then one more important ruler, Bhagabhadra. Bhagabhadra. Brihadrada was the last emperor. You sometimes these names will give you confusion. Brihadrada was the last Mauryan ruler. Bhagabhadra was the one of the Shunga rulers. Then Devabhuti. These people are important in the sense some historical developments are associated with these rulers. 1. Pushyamitra Shunga, who he killed which person? Brihadrada. Brihadrada was killed last Mauryan. So this is prelims question. Who killed the last Mauryan ruler? Named Brihadrada. He was Pushyamitra Shunga. One question. Next. Second question. Related to Agnimitra. This is previous question. Agnimitra was the son of Pushyamitra Shunga. As we have seen here, Shatavahanas were there, Shungas were here. They used to fight for this territory. There is a territory called Vidarbha. Shungas also wanted to annex Vidarbha region, and Shatavahanas also wanted to annex Vidarbha region. Pushyamitra Shunga sent his son Agnimitra. He sent his son Agnimitra to conquer Vidarbha region. This story is important for us to remember about Agnimitra. Directly we can remember what is important for prelims examination. However, it will not stick to your brain unless you know this story. Agnimitra was sent for Vidarbha. Then Shatavahanas were also trying to conquer Vidarbha. Now both fought. Finally, Vidarbha, the southern part came to Shatavahanas, northern part was annexed to Shunga Empire. Agnimitra, now he was a military commander. About Agnimitra, there is a romantic story, Malavika. The love story or the marriage between Agnimitra and Malavika. This story was written by Kalidasa. This romantic story, this romantic historical development penned by Kalidasa in his story Malavikagnimitram. Malavikagnimitram. Now you see the term Malavika, name of woman, lady. Agnimitra is this Agnimitra. This is the previous year question. Malavikagnimitram of Kalidasa was writing about which of the following Shunga rulers? That is about Agnimitra. Or Malavikagnimitram was written by which of the following poets? Kalidasa. Oh, another question came. So he is directly related to our important, one of the greatest poets that India ever produced, Kalidasa. Agnimitra became one of the heroes of Kalidasa writings. Hence, Agnimitra is important person for prelims. Bhagabhadra. When it comes to Bhagabhadra, one important aspect about Bhagabhadra is Pushyamitra Shunga, when he was the ruler, when Pushyamitra Shunga was the ruler, Pataliputra was the main base. Court was established, court rulings, court developments were going on from Pataliputra. Gradually, Vidisha also became one of the important centers of administration. Especially during Bhagabhadra period. Here, this is why it is important, and this is not that only for this reason it is important. The most important aspect will come now. Vidisha, Pataliputra. He used to conduct his court proceedings Bhagabhadra used to conduct court proceedings both in Pataliputra and Vidisha. When Vidisha was such a great, even ambassadors also used to come and represent the respective kingdoms in Vidisha. One ambassador came from Indo-Greeks. This is important for prelims. Indo-Greeks, they sent. Now initially you see, during Pushyamitra Shunga time period, there were conflicts with Indo-Greeks. Indo-Greeks were in the continuous expansion mode, and the Shungas also tried to defend their territories. Battles. Continuous battles were there. Now when it comes to after 2 generations, now both had settlements, now both wanted to establish their rule peacefully. During Bhagabhadra time period, they sent an ambassador called Heliodorus. Heliodorus, he resided in Vidisha, and in his memory, he issued a pillar inscription. That we are calling it as Heliodorus pillar inscription. This is important for prelims. The person, the Indo-Greek ambassador who issued pillar inscription in Vidisha, this place, that's why I have already mentioned about there is another place called Besnagar near Vidisha. He issued this pillar inscription in Besnagar. In Besnagar, Heliodorus issued this inscription, that is pillar inscription. The importance about this pillar inscription is evidence about the existing religion called Bhagavata. Heliodorus called himself as Bhagavata. That means Heliodorus accepted this Bhagavata religion. Now here so many things are coming here. Just with one evidence we are able to infer so many developments now. Bhagavata, this part of Vasudeva cult related to Lord Krishna. You can understand during this time period Hinduism is revivaling. Revival of Hinduism is taking place. To be specific, we should not call Hinduism, but the term Hinduism is a modern name. For the first time, the term Hinduism was used in modern India. During this time, you can say the exact specific word Brahmanical tradition. Brahmanical religion. This is important. Just one inscription is giving this much evidence. Brahmanical religion is reviving. Now, before post-Mauryan age, till Mauryan age, Buddhism and Jainism were very popular. Remember, while studying about later Vedic period and Mahajanapada period, as a reaction to the Brahmanical sacrifices, new non-violent religions emerged, Buddhism and Jainism. Now, after some time period, during this time period, Buddhism gained a lot of royal patronage, majorly in the form of Ashoka's patronage. Jainism also, Chandragupta Maurya, royal family members patronized Jainism. After this, Shungas belong to Brahmanical religion. Here you have to remember these people related to Brahmanical community. This is the revival of Brahmanical religion. The evidence is Besnagar pillar inscription given by Heliodorus. This is one aspect. Another aspect, these people are foreigners. Now foreigners are accepting Indian religion. This is another inference what we can get from this pillar inscription. On one hand, foreigners are integrated. On the other hand, this Brahmanical religion is reviving. Bhagavata and Lord Krishna devotional cult is also a non-violent one. Now Brahmanical religion now reformed itself into a non-violent one on the lines of Buddhism and Jainism. It has enriched the Indian culture. One aspect, and this enriched culture now seen by foreigners as a great development, and they are ready to accept these religions. Example is Heliodorus. He called himself as Bhagavata. From this inference we are getting this much information. During whose time period it happened? Bhagabhadra. Now Bhagabhadra is also important for prelims because of Heliodorus. Pushyamitra Shunga, Agnimitra, Bhagabhadra. Mostly students do not know about these three people. We study about Pushyamitra Shunga only in one sentence, that is, he killed the last Mauryan ruler, then he established Shunga dynasty. However, so many other developments are going on during this time period. Politically, economically, culturally, religious, so many developments are going to take place during this time period. The last one, Devabhuti, he is important only in the sense that, like Brihadrada, he was Mauryan. Mauryan ruler was killed by Pushyamitra Shunga. Now Devabhuti was the last Shunga ruler. He was killed by a Kanva. Kanva king, and Kanva dynasty established after Devabhuti. Like Brihadrada, here Devabhuti. He was the last Mauryan ruler. He was the last Shunga ruler. He was killed by a Kanva ruler and he established Kanva dynasty. These are important. With respect to prelims, Heliodorus is important. Base Nagar, pillar inscription is important. Bhagabhadra, Vidisha. Now Agnimitra, Kalidasa. Always remember the geography of Shunga Empire. Then who are the neighbors? Indo-Greeks and Shatavahanas. Agnimitra fought with the Shatavahanas. Then Pushyamitra Shunga fought with the Indo-Greeks. During this time period, there is some historical references are saying that in order to revive the Brahmanical religion, some kind of persecution took place with respect to Buddhism. Persecution to persecution of Buddhists. Persecution by Pushyamitra Shunga. Is it true? Now we have to analyze this. Shungas, they replaced Mauryas. Mauryas patronized Buddhism. Mauryas were replaced by a Brahmanical dynasty, revived Brahmanical movement. Some traditions are saying that majorly Buddhist texts, Pushyamitra Shunga was a tyrant. He killed many Buddhists and he destroyed many Buddhist relics. According to one text, 84,000 stupas. This is also important with respect to Main's point of view. This is to show that religious tolerance. Ashoka is known for religious tolerance. When it comes to Shungas, two kinds of theories are there. One is they are not tolerant people. In order to counter that, here the evidence for intolerance of Shungas is that 84,000 stupas built by Ashoka were destroyed by Shungas. This is the inference, this is the textual reference given by Buddhist text, According to this means he was not liking Buddhism and he tried to destroy the Buddhist monuments. Pushyamitra Shunga. And there is also a royal order. A royal order. According to this royal order, reward will be given. A very high reward will be given if any person brings the head of a Buddhist monk. If a person brings the head of Buddhist monk, that means if a person kills Buddhist monk, then he will be rewarded monetarily. There is a kind of order. Based on these things, that Buddhists were persecuted by Pushyamitra Shunga. Now the counter argument for this is, if 84,000 stupas were destroyed, then how come the iconic stupa in Indian history is, what is that? Sanchi Stupa. Why Sanchi Stupa was developed by Shungas? This is the reason why I have written Sanchi also. Besnagar is also important. Sanchi is also important. Sanchi, now see Vidisha. Vidisha is one of the administrative centers of Shungas. In their own administrative center, a very important Sanchi Stupa was developed further. Ashoka established this stupa, only he established a normal construction, but this construction was further refined and made very big by Shungas, and also in their near administrative capital. Why was it done? That means they are not tolerant as it was portrayed. They were not persecuting Buddhists and they are not destroying the Buddhist monuments the way the Buddhist texts are portraying Pushyamitra Shunga. Now this is another important aspect about Shungas, whether they are persecutors of Buddhism or not. One tradition is saying 84,000 stupas destroyed, based on this they were persecuting. However, it is not so. If they are really doing, why did they develop Sanchi Stupa? And there is no reference also that these 84,000 stupas also. That's why they did not show that kind of intolerance the way Buddhist text portrayed Pushyamitra Shunga. Probably it was the age of invasions. Probably in order to maintain law and order, this kind of rewards or this kind of orders might have been given. But we do not exactly know in what circumstances he was giving this kind of orders. This is about Shungas. Now important points also with respect to prelims we have seen: Pushyamitra Shunga, Brihadratha, Agnimitra, Kalidasa, Bhagabhadra, Heliodorus, Devabhuti, Kanva dynasty. Now come to the second one, that is Shatavahanas, the immediate neighbors of Shatavahanas. Before going to the Shatavahanas, let us see Indo-Greeks. It will give us continuity. Indo-Greeks. Here Shungas. We have dealt about Shungas now. Now we are moving to the Indo-Greeks. What are the developments here? Indo-Greeks. When it comes to Indo-Greeks, some developments were taking place. Now it is the interaction area. Interaction between Greek culture and Indian culture. When they entered into Indian subcontinent, when they entered into northwestern part of India, they were having Greek culture. Remember, Ashoka also issued an inscription in Greek language and Greek script. Greek script and Greek language were used by Ashoka in giving one of his inscriptions in present day Afghanistan area. Already Ashoka has shown that this evidence is giving that here Indo-Greeks were settling there, and he wanted to propagate his Dhamma even to these people as well. Or in his empire, now Indians, Greeks, he issued one more inscription in Aramaic. Aramaic inscription is coming from Iran. That means the people who came from Iran also settled, the people who came from Greeks also settled, Indians were also settling. Because of all these interactions, Aramaic plus here this is Brahmi script. Brahmi script and Aramaic script combination led to the rise of Kharoshthi script. All these are important when it comes to Mauryan inscriptions. In each and every script we find the inscriptions of Ashoka. In Brahmi script, in Kharoshthi script, in Aramaic script and in Greek script. All these were used by Ashoka. These are popular languages, popular script. These popular scripts were used by Ashoka to propagate his Dhamma. Therefore, all these scripts are important in the Indian context. Indo-Greeks, by this time period, Indo-Greeks settled here. They became part and parcel of the Indian culture around this area. They were pushing, they also tried to enter into the Indian subcontinent, and at one point of time they reached even till Pataliputra. At one point of time, after Shungas, Kanvas were there, they tried to push further. During Shungas itself, they tried to enter into these areas. However, Shungas, Pushyamitra Shunga and his successors tried to curtail the power of Indo-Greeks to till this area. Some important personalities from Indo-Greeks now, and what is their contribution for the Indian history. This is what we have to study here. Indo-Greeks, a ruler called Menander. A ruler called Menander. He had his capital near Sialkot. You see this Pataliputra. You have to remember some of the important capitals of these kingdoms. Then we can easily connect. Sialkot, Pataliputra, Vidisha, and when it comes to Shatavahanas, we have Paitan or Pratishtanapura and Amaravati or Dhanyakataka. Sialkot, it was his capital. Menander, he was a king, he was interested in Buddhism. They were having their own religion, Greek religion. Initially, they were following Greek religion. Later, he converted into Buddhism. He did not convert immediately. This shows the spirit of inquiry nature. He has so many questions about Buddhism. And there was a monk called Nagasena. Another name for Nagasena is Nagarjuna. Remember, Nagarjuna, in Shatavahana time period also, there was a monk called Nagarjuna, on whose name the present day Nagarjuna Konda name came. This Nagarjuna is different, and here whom we are talking about is different. Here Nagasena or Nagarjuna, he is a different one. According to one tradition, he belonged to some region near Himalayas. Whereas Nagarjuna in Deccan, in present day Nagarjuna Konda, he belonged to Shatavahana time period. He is different one. Nagasena. Menander asked so many questions about Buddhism. He posed so many questions to Nagasena. Nagasena answered all these questions to Menander. This question and answer compiled in a book called Milinda Panho. Milinda Panho or Milinda Prashna, Milinda Questions of Milinda. Another name for Menander is Milinda. Menander became Milinda. Now Nagasena or Nagarjuna. The question and answer, the conversation between two people became the text work. This work is giving about what kind of questions Menander asked, what kind of answers Nagasena has given. Here you can see the foreigners are now accepting Indian religion. Once again, one more evidence of showing that how this is happening. This is earlier part. In the sequence, when it comes to Heliodorus also, remember, he is also a Indo-Greek. Menander, important for prelims. Heliodorus, important for prelims because of his Besnagar inscription. Some Indo-Greeks accepted Buddhism. Now some Greeks accepted Bhagavatism. Now you see the evolution. Both are Indian religions. Now the foreigners are accepting the Indian religions and religious traditions. Is it clear? However, they are following Buddhism. Now if king follows Buddhism, most of his subjects also follow the Buddhism. That's how many Indo-Greeks accepted Buddhism as their religion. Now they brought their art and culture, the Greek way of philosophy, the Greek way of imagining gods, the way they look at gods. Now they started giving those attributes to Buddha also. That's how a new art called Gandhara art emerged in this area. Gandhara, remember, during Mahajanapada time periods, we have 16 great kingdoms, 16 Mahajanapadas, starting with here Anga, Magadha, Koshala, and if we go westward, Gandhara, Kamboja, 2 Mahajanapadas were there. This northwestern part was part of Gandhara kingdom. With that name, Gandhara art emerged. This Gandhara art is combination of Greek art and Indian art. So foreign influence is there in Gandhara art because of Indo-Greeks. One, Gandhara, very important for Indian culture. Around this time period, in the northwestern Gandhara, in Madura region, Madura art. Gandhara, Madura, here Amaravati sculpture. Related to Buddhism, Gandhara art, Madura art and sculpture, and Amaravati sculpture. We see in details when it comes to art and culture part. For now, you just remember the historical developments, how these, under what circumstances these arts are developing. Gandhara art emerged because of Indo-Greeks. This is another very significant contribution of Indo-Greeks to the Indian culture. So they are enriching Indian culture. Now you see the contrast. We are studying ancient India, post-Mauryan period. When it comes to the medieval period, you remember during medieval time period also this kind of invasions were going on. During that time, once again, Central Asian people. We will connect that part now after Indo-Greeks. After Indo-Greeks, now who came? Shakas. We will come to Satavahanas in the end. Indo-Greeks, we have seen Menander, Nagasena, important people you have to remember for prelims examination. When it comes to mains examination, write about Gandhara art, write about different art and sculptures during this time period, post-Mauryan period. These kind of things are coming in mains examination. The analytical part, If you remember the geography, if you remember the territory commanded by these Indo-Greeks and Shungas, you will be able to write the mains answer. When it comes to prelims, these facts are important. If you know the kings and their conversations with other people, religious developments, then only you can easily remember and you can answer the questions in prelims. Menander, Nagasena, Milinda Banho. Heliodorus, Bhagavatism, Base Nagar Pillar. Bhagabhadra, Base Nagar Pillar near Sanchi, Vidisha. Now come to next Central Asian. Now these people from Western. Indo-Greeks came from this region. Now new entrants from Central Asia, these were Shakas. Initially they were called Scythians. Scythia is the tribe in Central Asia. When they came here, like Greeks, initially Greeks, here now you see how the names are changing. Greeks, when they came here, they became Indo-Greeks. Similarly, Indo-Scythians, when they enter here, they became Shakas. That is how Scythians, Indo-Scythians, then Shakas. Here we will focus on Shakas. They came from this part. We are giving the name directly, Shakas. They came from Central Asia. They were trying to invade Chinese region also. However, the Chinese wall pushed them backward and they pushed the Indo-Greeks here. Indo-Greeks came further and Shakas entered in this region and they created territories. They created different territories in northwestern part, present day Afghanistan area, Madura region, western Malwa, in different parts of India. They came and settled in the Indian subcontinent. One more example is coming now, how foreigners are accepting Indian tradition. This is one example how Indo-Greeks are accepting Indian culture and Indian religions. Shakas will give the another example how they became part and parcel of Indian society. Whatever may be the traditions what they were following earlier, but when they came to Indian subcontinent, they accepted and they patronized, not only accepting, they patronized very actively and they promoted Indian culture further. Shakas, when it comes to Shakas, one important ruler we will remember. His name is Rudradaman. He issued an inscription called Girnar. Initially they started from here and they settled in different parts. Finally, some of the powerful people like Rudradaman settled in this area. Rudradaman. Now you see how they became Indianized. The term Rudra, it is related to Shiva. Now let us go to this, let us compare. Indo-Greeks, Menander became Buddhist, Heliodorus became Bhagavatism. Now how Rudradaman became a Shaiva. Shaika, another foreign tribe, entered into Indian subcontinent, accepting the names related to Shaivism. Rudradaman, the name itself is indicating that they were following Shaivism. He issued an inscription in Girnar. Girnar is famous since Mauryan time period itself. The time period of Rudradaman around 130 to 150 AD, or you can say 150 AD. Around 150 AD. Menander around 185 or around 150 BC, you can say. Pushyamitra Shunga 185 BC. From BC to AD we entered. Rudradaman, There are other people like Chestana, some other people were also there related to Shaka, but we remember about Shakas mainly from Rudradaman. He belonged to Shaka tribe. Shakas came from Central Asia. This is what we have to remember. And how they became Indianized with their name itself indicating. While studying about the conflict between Shakas, and these people had more conflicts with Shatavahanas. Relatively, they conquered these areas. However, they could not conquer in the Deccan region because of strong presence of Shatavahanas. While studying Shatavahanas, we will study about this conflict between Shakas and Shatavahanas. This is the region where they used to conflict always. This region is the famous Shatavahanas. For some time, these areas go to Shaka's territory, and sometime it will come to Shatavahanas territory. Now you see Shatavahanas, while Shungas were there, they fought with them. Now Shungas are replaced with different rulers. Now they had to fight. In this part also, Indo-Greeks replaced by Shakas. Now Shakas entered into this region. When they came to Deccan, Gujarat, Malwa region, once again fighting started between Shakas and Shatavahanas. It is only, you have to see only in terms of geopolitics. You can say geopolitics. It is not directly related to religion. The study of post-Mauryan age will give us a brief idea how we should learn about medieval India. Now I am going to connect Indo-Greeks, then Shakas, how they are accepting Indian tradition. When it comes to Turks, here I am giving you this example. When they come to Turks, who are these Turks? They also came from Central Asia, but different time period. Shakas in 1st century BC, Turks around 11th and 12th century AD. Nearly after 1200 years, another tribe, Turks, also entered. In between, Hunas were also there. They also came from Central Asia. Before Hunas, Kushan. The tradition continues. Shakas. Shakas from Central Asia, Kushans from Central Asia, Hunas from Central Asia, Turks once again from Central Asia. Up to this point, we don't have any problem with respect to our history, or when it comes to the modern day, what we are calling it as communalism. One of the evils of Indian society at the moment is also communalism, and during freedom struggle also communalism. Because of this communalism, Indian subcontinent had to be divided into two different countries. Now in fact it became three countries: Pakistan, Bangladesh and India. One of the evils is communalism. This is traced to the advent of Turks. Now if you know post-Mauryan age very well, now in what light you should see Turks invasions also becomes very clear. When Shakas came, when Kushans came, when Hunas came, they all became part and parcel of Indian society and Indian tradition. They accepted Indian religions. Now we will see Kushans also. Shakas, they accepted Indian traditions, Indian names, now the contribution to the Indian culture. Kushans also, they in Kashmir region, Buddhism, they patronized Buddhism. They not only patronized Buddhism, we will study Kushans now. Here we have given the example of Buddhism, one Bhagavatism, that means you can say Vaishnavism, one Shaivism example. Kushans are going to patronize all these three. That's why Kushans we will study later. Here I am trying to connect with Turks. Huns also, when they came here, once again Shaivism and Buddhism. When the Turks came, the problem came here, the religion from outside India, that is Islam. The main difference here we have to see. When during post-Mauryan period also invasions took place, when they entered into Indian subcontinent, they accepted the religions which are already popular in the Indian subcontinent. When Turks came, they brought new religion from outside and they started promoting this religion which they brought with them. Shakas also might be having their own religion. Greeks also might be having their own religion. Kushans, Huns, they all having their tribal religions. Their tribal religions, however, they did not impose on the Indian people because they felt their Indian culture is more advanced and Indian religions were far advanced and they accepted it and patronized. When Turks came, scenarios changed. The scenario changed. Here, the Turks themselves felt that their religion is great. They saw the religion of Indians, common people, is not great because Islam believed in monotheism, Indians believed in polytheism. So many gods, so many ideals. Now, some of the beliefs between Islam and the Brahmanical or Indian way of religion was different. Due to these differences, some conflicts did arise. These conflicts gradually led to the rise of a evil in the Indian society, that is communalism. Why I am giving this example Turks means, when they entered, this conflict was there. No doubt. When they entered, new religious beliefs, now fundamentally they are different, some kind of conflict was there. However, after 100 years of settlements or 200 years of settlement, Turkish people also became Indianized. This is what we have to see here. Shakas, they entered here, became Indianized. Kushans, Indianized. Huns, Indianized. Turks also, initially there was a conflict, but later, after some time, they became Indianized. It contributed and it became one of the strength of Indian culture to accept different religions and different cultures and became a unique culture, that is Indian culture. This one, once again, when it comes to Turks, like we see, Shakas, they have different branches. In the northwestern branch, just for few minutes only, we will try to compare Shakas and Turks, then we will come back to the Kushans. When Shakas also entered, now I am trying to compare with Shakas entry and Turkish entry. Turks. Shakas, initially they had different areas under their control. Here, Satavahanas. Now you see, when they entered here, Shatavahanas and Shakas also fought together. They fought. Here we will not see in terms of religion. When Shakas and Shatavahanas were fighting, we won't see this part of history as a religious conflict. However, it is a geopolitical conflict. This is why we have to remember this geopolitical conflict. How we are going to connect with the Turks now? Now we will see. When it comes to Turks, they entered here, they became Sultans of Delhi, Delhi Sultanate. After the disintegration of Delhi Sultanate, different kingdoms emerged. Here Gujarat Sultanate, here Bahmani Sultanate. Here Vijayanagar. Here Vijayanagar, here Bahmani. Now you just compare. Shakas were there, Shatavahanas were there. Shakas came from outside, Shatavahanas here. Bahmanis, Turks, Vijayanagar, indigenous dynasty. Now they also conflict, they also started fighting. Whereas in case of medieval India, we see in terms of religious color is given to these conflicts. But as a student of history, those who are trying to write exam for all India service, they should see this difference very clearly. When there was some kind of foreign invasions, they became Indianized. However, the conflict is common when two political powers share the same kind of border. When Shakas and Satavahanas were trying to conquer some of the areas in between, conflict was inevitable, whereas this was not seen in the religious color. In case of Bahmanis and Vijayanagara kingdom also, conflict is inevitable because they wanted to control the geography. Because this area, Krishna and Tungabhadra Doab is very rich and fertile area. Bahmani also wanted to conquer this fertile area. Vijayanagara also wanted to conquer fertile area. This geopolitical, this is the term geopolitical. Geopolitical, you have to see the conflict through geopolitical prism, not through religious. If religious color is given to these conflicts, it will create communal feeling in the society. However, history students should see it as a geopolitical conflict. Now, Bahmani kingdom. However, initially when they came in 1200s and in 1300s probably, Islam versus Hindu conflict was there. But once they entered, became part of Indian. Now, after so many generations, Bahmani kingdom emerged after 1350s. Later, Bahmani kingdom split into Bijapur, Golconda, 5 different. By this time period, in 1500s, 1400s, already 3-4 generations of Turkish people passed, and these people adopted to the Indian way of life. By the term Turks came, now you see Shakas, Kushans, by this time period, Brahmanical religion, Buddhism, Jainism. Before Turks and after Gupta period, we see Parsis also, who came from Iran, Jewish, Christians, all these religions were there. Now, in addition to that, Islam also came. In fact, Islam did not enter with the Turkish invasions. It came immediately during this region, Islam. When Muhammad Prophet was preaching in Saudi Arabia, around this time period, Islam entered even that touched Indian shores as well. So already Islam was also there when Turks people were there. Now only it enriched Indian culture. However, as a history student, one should not give this religious color. You have to see in the geopolitical angle. Only in order to explain this, I have brought Turks here. Otherwise, our point of discussion here with respect to post-Mauryan is Indo-Greeks, Shakas, Kushans, and now Shungas and Satavahanas, Karavela. Shakas is done. Now we will start with Kushans. Kushans we are studying. These people also came from Central Asia like Shakas. However, these people were powerful. They commanded very large area, combining both Indian territory and Central Asian territory. Kushans were very powerful in the sense it was they were commanding the Silk Route. Silk Route was passing from China to Europe. Silk Route was going under Kushan's territory. Now they levied toll tax. Because of this toll tax, the wealth of Kushans increased further. That's why Kushans became very powerful. They could command very large area. One aspect here, rulers like Confucius. Most important ruler is Kanishka. Kanishka, different traditions are giving different the time period. Some say 78 AD is the starting period of his rule, and most of the traditions or most authentic one is giving around 120 ADs or 130 120 ADs. Around 120 130, that time period is giving the Kanishka regime. Before the emergence of new evidence, 70-80 AD is the accepted or regarded as the period when Kanishka coronated. Why 78 BD specifically we are focusing? This became a Shaka era. Kushans, Kanishka, 78 AD is the time period when Kanishka coronated. His reign started. Even today's Indian government is taking 78 AD as the beginning of Shaka era. This is important for prelims. When it comes to Shakas also, there is one era. Like we see here, when Shakas entered in different parts of the country, they tried to establish their power. In case of Malwa also, they were trying to create their power. However, a ruler called Vikramaditya, local ruler, he tried to resist Shakas. Shakas were foreigners. Local ruler called Vikramaditya, he tried to resist the presence of Shakas in Ujjaini region. He fought with them and he expelled Shakas from his territory, and they went out of his territory. This Vikramaditya, this time period is 58 BC. This 58 BC we are calling as Vikram era. Kushans, Shaka era, Vikram era, 58 BC. So Shakas, when it comes to Shakas, we have one era, that is Vikram era, 58 BC. Why Vikram era emerged? Because a local ruler called Vikramaditya, he resisted Shakas' invasion and he expelled them. From thereafter, the name Vikramaditya became title for many rulers. Even during Gupta time period, there is a ruler called Chandragupta II. After Samudragupta, Chandragupta II comes. Now you see, around 58 BC we are talking about the Shakas. During Gupta time period also we are talking about Shakas. Some Shakas were there in Gujarat and Malwa region even during Gupta time period. Now this shows this is around 400s. That means Shakas were there as political power for nearly 500 years. Shatavahanas also ruled for nearly 500 years. You see how long these people ruled the Indian subcontinent, for some parts of Indian subcontinent in post-Mauryan period. Shakas, some remnants of Shakas still were there. When Chandragupta II is expanding his territories, he has driven Shakas out. That means he dethroned from political power and he controlled Shaka's territories. As Chandragupta II now defeated Shakas, already the Vikram era sees Vikramaditya the title. Chandragupta II also has taken the title Vikramaditya. Vikramaditya. Now this Vikramaditya, initially he was a ruler who fought with the Shakas around 58 BC. 58 BC became Vikram era. Later, this name of a particular king became title of other rulers. According to NCERT, nearly 14 Vikramadityas are there in Indian history. In different contexts, when they were fighting and whenever they were winning against foreign-based rulers, they used to take this title Vikramaditya. In medieval India also, we will see one more Vikramaditya, Hemu Vikramaditya. Hemu Vikramaditya. With whom he fought? He fought with Mughals. Now we see Mughals versus Hemu Vikramaditya. He was a Hindu ruler. After Sher Shah Suri, he also took the title Vikramaditya for his fighting against foreigners. Likewise, whenever a ruler fight against foreign-based rulers, they used to take this title Vikramaditya. So this is important for prelims. Vikramaditya, Vikram era, 58 BC, related to Shakas. When it comes to Kushans, 78 AD, Shaka era, important for prelims. Another important aspect for Kushan area region is Kanishka was the one who convened 4th Buddhist Council. Remember, this time period we are talking about 1st century AD. 1st century AD, before Kushans, Shakas were there. Then before Shakas, Indo-Greeks. Now we list out the religions. What are the religions we have? Buddhism. Buddhism is there around 1st century AD. Then Jainism. Then Brahmanical religion turned into different Bhakti movement, that is Bhagavatism. Then Shaivism. These kind of religions already there by 1st century AD. Around this time period, now Bhagavatism, Buddhism, all these are spreading into different parts of the country. Kushans were controlling this region. In this region also, these people, these religions, ideas are already there. Before Kushans came, we have seen how Menander and Nagasena, Menander, here only, Sialkot, Menander and Nagasena, Milinda Panho, he turned into Buddhism and different regions, different people became Buddhism, and it was also time period Buddhism entered into China also through the Silk Route. So Buddhism, Jainism, Bhagavatism, Shaivism are already well established religions by this time period. Buddhism became more popular around this time period, very strong, dominant one. He convened a Buddhist council called 4th Buddhist Council. Important monks like Vasumitra, Ashwagosha were important Buddhist monks flourished and patronized by Kanishka. Patronized by Kanishka, flourished during Kushan's reign. Ashwagosha, he is also important in case he has written the life story of Buddha. Life of Buddha, that is Buddha Charita. Important for prelims. Vasumitra is important because he was the president of Buddhist Council. He was presiding the 4th Buddhist Council, convened by Kanishka, where? In Kashmir. In prelims, anything can be asked. 4th Buddhist Council held in Kashmir, held by Kanishka, presided by Vasumitra. Another contemporary, Ashwagosha, Buddha Charita, he also has written Saundaranandana. Saundaranandana, another Buddhist related text. The speciality of these texts are he has written in Sanskrit. Now you see, along with religions, language wise also the time period, Sanskrit, revival of Sanskrit culture. In early Vedic period, Sanskrit culture, language. When it comes to Mauryas, when it comes to Buddha, Jaina, Mahavira and Maurya, they followed Prakrit language. Common language, common people. Sanskrit is elitist. Prakrit is common people. Now the revival of Sanskrit, like Sanskrit culture, Sanskrit religion, now Sanskrit language also revived. You remember, now you see, Ashwagosha is writing about Buddhist texts. Buddhist texts in Sanskrit language. Now you see the syncretic nature of Indian religions. Sanskrit is related to Vedic religion. Buddhism is related to Prakrit language. Now Buddhism and the Sanskrit language now merged. A syncretic culture is emerging. Now you see, how do you think post-Mauryan period is really dark age? Not at all. This is the age where really the syncretic culture of India is emerging. During Mauryan period itself already started. Now it is entering into the next phase of syncretic culture. Language wise, Sanskrit, Buddhism, for when foreigners are coming here and they are accepting Indian religions. Kanishka is popular because of 4th Buddhist Council. Now important people related to 4th Buddhist Council. Now if you remember, if you see the names of these Kushan rulers also, they have adopted titles like Vasudeva. Vasudeva is related to Bhagavatism. And they have adopted with the name Shiva. So they have accepted Bhagavatism, they patronized Bhagavatism also, they patronized Shaivism also, they patronized Buddhism also. This is how the contribution of Kushans. And during this time period, Madura region also is under Kushans for some time. Madura art and culture also flourished during this time period, while Gandhara art is going on. Gandhara art, now Madura art. This is the contribution of Kushans. What are the aspects which we have to remember? Kanishka, Sakayara, 78 AD. Kanishka related to Buddhism. However, they did not patronize only Buddhism. They patronized Shaivism, Bhagavatism also. Before Kushans, Shakas came. Shakas, they started because of Shakas. Now, this is the confusing part. When it comes to Kushans, we are talking about Shaka era. When it comes to Shakas, we are talking about Vikram era. This confusion, you have to make it clear. Unless you know the story, you cannot remember this. Otherwise, Shakas, the Shaka era student may feel that Shaka era is belong to Shakas, Vikram era is belong to Kushana era. However, it is not the case. It is reverse. Kushana era, Shaka era, Shakas, Vikram era. We do not know exactly on what basis this related to when Kushan time period, why the name Shaka era came. Whether it is really he defeated, already Shakas were there. Is it really that Kanishka also defeated Shakas, that's why he has taken the Shaka era or not, we do not know. Shakas we have seen, Indo-Greeks we have seen, now we see Satavahanas. So far we have seen about Shungas. Let's start here. First we will go to our maps. Nanda, Maurya, post-Mauryan age. We have seen about Indo-Greeks, then Scythians, they became Shakas. After Shakas, Kushans came. We have seen them also. We have seen Shungas also, Shunga Empire. Now we are entering into another indigenous dynasty, that is Satavahanas.